So this is the number one way you can increase the fertility of your soil. Real quick, my name is Phil Simmons. I help with growers to transition their farms to regenerative farms so that they can get all these benefits to their farms, increasing profits, increasing production, increasing the quality of their food. If you want to work with us, send us a message at agresol.com.au, which is in the link below. And let's get into it. So the number one way to improve your soils is through cover crops. A cover crop is planting any plants that you really want to grow in a particular area, so you can just grow that plant and to produce biomass. Now there's a number of different things that you can get out of cover crops, and there's heaps of different ways you can grow cover crops and the different varieties and species you can have in a cover crop. But in general, we're aiming for a few different things from our cover crop. So these include, it covers the soil, increases soil organic carbon, increases microbial activity in populations, increases nutrients, and increases or improves our structure of the soil. And so essentially how this works is we're growing our cover crop. Now it can be anything. Best thing you want to do is make a multi-species mix of just everything you can that grows. Now different plants will have different benefits. And it does depend on what you really want to target, but in general, this is how it works. So we plant a crop, we have our plants growing, they're putting their roots down, and they have their leaves covering the soil. So the first benefit is covering the soil. And so we want to always be covering our soil so that it protects the soil and the microbes from UV light. So for example, here, if we had a fallow period, which is very typical in Australia over the summer, we're going to get all this heat and light coming in and heating up the soil here. Now that's going to form a hard crust. It's going to kill all the microbial activity and populations. It's also going to increase evaporation. In general, it's not very good for living organisms. Whereas if we go to our cover crop, definitely in the summer, we're going to have our light coming in, but it's going to hit our living canopy. That's going to be producing sugars, it's going to be photosynthesizing, but most importantly, it's going to be protecting our soil and the top part of our soils. So it's going to be covering our soils. Another thing that comes directly from this is that we're going to be increasing our soil organic carbon. And so what happens is we have sugars produced in the leaves. They're going to go through our plant, into our roots, and then thrown out as root exudates into the soil. That's one way that soil organic carbon is produced. I actually have produced a course if you want to learn more about soil organic carbon and how to build it. That is on the Soil Learning Centre, and I'll put a link down below. But essentially, we will be increasing our soil organic carbon through root exudates. And also, if we come through and either graze it or crimp it down, which is a technique to terminate the cover crop, then we'll be incorporating all this organic matter into our soils and it'll decompose. So we're going to be increasing our soil organic carbon, which will increase our water holding capacity and a whole bunch of other benefits. Another benefit that we'll get from having cover crops in our system is that these sugars, these root exudates, will be feeding the microbial communities in our soil. And so say if we had a fallow period, there's no plants producing root exudates to feed any life, and there probably won't be any life anyways if they're getting all killed by sunlight and heating up that soil. But in here, it's all protected. These plants will be feeding the microbes. Those microbes will be able to live in symbiotic relationships with the plants. It'll be forming relationships with the mycorrhizal fungi, which are really important for nutrient exchange and water exchange. And so we're going to be increasing our microbes and all the benefits that we get from those, which include increasing nutrients. So this comes from a relationship that our plants have with microbes. There's a whole bunch of different relationships, but we're going to increase our nutrients. We're also going to increase the cycling of nutrients. So these plants will be taking up, say, potassium. Let's say, for example, we have potassium taken up by our roots. It's taken up into our leaves. That potassium, once this plant is chopped down, allowed to fall onto the ground and mineralise or decompose, those nutrients will be in a plant or bioavailable form. So it's easier for the plant to pick up next time. And so essentially what we're doing here is we're creating our own compost by growing our own plants. So we grow all these plants, cut them down, allow them to decompose on the surface, releasing nutrients. Another benefit we get from cover crops is that they increase structure. So all these roots that they're putting down is going to be breaking up the soil, it's going to be forming aggregates. The relationship with particular mycorrhizal fungi will produce this stable compound to make stable aggregates. And so having just roots in the ground to break up and hold together the soil particles into aggregates will allow us to increase our structure. Now, you want all of this in our soils, and I have a couple of different videos on each of these, but all of this comes with growing plants in our soils. So the more plants we can grow and the more sunlight we can capture and put into our soils and stimulate microbes and build structure and all of that, the more fertile our soil is. So this is the number one way you can increase the fertility of your soil, and that is by increasing all this. It's very cost effective. You know, you're buying seed, you can maybe put some fertilizer on if you want, but probably don't have to. It is important to know that with cover crops you probably won't see the most amount of return until the third year. And so a general rule of thumb is that once you cut, say, all these down and you allow them to fall and start to decompose, 50% of the biomass will be available in 12 months time for the following year for the next crop to pick up. And so if we think about these plants as 3% nitrogen, 50% of that 3% nitrogen is going to be available for the next plant, which is 1.5% of the biomass of these plants will be available the following year. But if we say take this crop, do that 1 year, repeat the cycle, we will then take another 50% of what was done the previous year, so the remaining 1.5%, and then add it onto this year's cover crop. So we'll get 1.5% plus 0.75%, and so it'll compound over time. And so with composting pretty much our cover crop, almost like a green manure crop, we'll be increasing the overall nutrients in our soil. Now, there has been a couple of reports that suggest that having a cover crop will reduce the water holding or available water in our soils. However, it's I think it's still up in arms. There's definitely massive benefits in increasing the porosity in our soils, and so if you get a big downpour, this soil here won't absorb all that rain. It'll hit the soil, form a crust, and wash away. Whereas if we have a cover crop, it'll hit the leaves and then hit the soil, and then it'll allow it to permeate through the soil. We have our roots, which have formed these massive pores and allow that water to really soak down into the profile of our soils. So there is some evidence to suggest in a really dry year that fallow rest is better. However, I think over a long period of time, a cover crop, definitely over summer, even in between your orchards. So I'm working with a grower at the moment, helping him to transition to Regen Ag, and we're putting down cover crops in between the citrus trees. So we're going to pretty much generate all of this for his orchard, particularly increasing nutrients, microbes, soil again, carbon, also soaking up excess sodium and chloride out of his soil. But we're doing all that using cover crops, growing plants. Anyway, so this is the overview of cover crops. We're pretty much growing plants to get all these benefits. We're keeping them on farm, we're cutting them or grazing them there so that we can get all these benefits. Thanks very much for watching. Make sure to share around. Cheers.